Nick, vaccines, when and when?
Yeah, it's quite a technical problem, a technical thing to talk about, Rob, and we'll talk a wee bit about clostridial vaccines today because it's coming time. We've got the next big thing on the forecast is lambing, really. So we need to be talking and thinking about that. So clostridial vaccines, there's a couple of products that names will come to mind, and we'll talk about 5-in-1 vaccination and also lamb vaccination. And there's some very important differences between the two that people need to understand. And we'll also talk maybe a little bit about the different protocols and how and when to use these products. So clostridial vaccines protect against a lot of the sudden death type diseases and include diseases such as pulpy kidney, tetanus are the big two, but also malignant edema and the blood poisoning type diseases. Yep. So when we're talking about vaccines on the whole, we're inducing an animal to produce immunity, and a great part of that immunity is derived from antibody production. Not the whole picture, but it's easier just to talk about antibodies at the moment. So what has to happen initially in a vaccine course, particularly with clostridial vaccines, is an animal initially has to be exposed at least twice to get a good antibody response or immune response. The first vaccine that's given, the first shot, that will prime the animal to produce immunity, and the second shot will induce that immunity. And then
So that's like a booster?
Exactly. So, and then going forward from that point of time, once we've had a good immune response, animals need to be boosted regularly, typically annually. And so if we can time the timing of that booster, we can take advantage of certain physiological things. For instance, if we're boostering a breeding ewe at around 4 to 6 weeks prior to lambing, we know that we're going to have a very, very high antibody level to some of those diseases, and we can take advantage of that and know that it's going to be passaged onto the lamb or lambs through the milk. And so with 5-in-1
So it doesn't go in through while it's still unborn?
Doesn't go through while it's unborn, but it will get passaged onto the lamb within the first really 12 to 24 hours through colostrum, that's right. And so by boostering at the required time with 5-in-1 vaccine, we can ensure that's going to happen. So the typical scenario with breeding ewes is to try and set up a system where they're fully immune and they're boosted about 4 to 6 weeks prior to lambing, and then of course we get good protection for tetanus and pulpy kidney carrying through often until the time of weaning, in fact, and sometimes docking and then weaning. If we talk about lamb vaccine, that's a very, very different product. And although it has the typical pulpy kidney type immunity that's induced standardly, as I've just explained, the tetanus protection with lamb vaccine is ready-made. It's ready-made antibody that's been produced actually in a Percheron horse, actually, which they've taken and put into that product, and that will induce immediate immunity, but it's very short-lived. So it's not relying on the lamb itself to produce the immunity. It's giving ready-made antibodies, and they'll hang around and be effective for about 10 to 12 days, for instance. And so
when do you use that then?
Lamb vaccine's given at docking, and typically it'll induce some protection or get well on the way to producing some protection for pulpy kidney. But the big plus is that we're going to get ready-made immunity in an animal that may not be immune if you haven't induced the pre-lambing vaccine of the ewe to tetanus. So we've got a docking wound that's going to not be susceptible to getting infected with tetanus spores.
Of course, because it's an open wound in many cases.
The big thing, though, that people need to be aware is that if lamb vaccine's used and one still wants to look at consolidated and good immunity in that lamb, they're still going to have to go through a regular 2-shot course of 5-in-1 vaccine, because of course the antibody derived for tetanus in particular is only going to hang around for a few days. It's not reliant on the animal's immune system itself, and we've got very limited cover for the other clostridial diseases, so we've only really got a first shot often for pulpy kidney. And as I explained just previous to this, we need 2 shots to induce a good immune response. And so it gets quite technical. And
Yeah, it does actually. I was sort of sitting here thinking exactly. Wild card, people who are sending off to the processing company lambs straight off the mothers.
Okay, so as far as that goes, there is no concern in regard to withholding time with these vaccines. So there's no problem with slaughter.
Good, okay, because we just wanted to credibility and traceability and all that sort of stuff. When do you use a 7-in-1?
7-in-1 is a little bit of a it was born on the back of a big outbreak of what was thought to be a disease called Clostridium sordalii, which supposedly killed a lot of very well-grown bulls, Rob. But the whole diagnosis has been put under question. I think the vaccine companies did a great thing. They responded to what the market demanded and what the fear of this disease taking hold. But to be honest, in recent times we're much more suspicious about sordalii being grown, the bug being grown without being the cause of disease, and actually a lot of us these days are thinking that a lot of those sordalii deaths in these bulls were actually feed induced, were actually due to bloat. So it's a little bit very suspicious.
Wee bit knee-jerk, but it was a good idea to cover it.
Absolutely. And we also have leptospirosis involved in some of these 7-in-1 vaccines. Lepto typically is a dairy cow related disease, and so I guess it's a good inducement to try and incorporate a wider range of immunity in dairy cows. And let's face it, I mean, you can lose 1 cow from a clostridial disease, and it's going to more than cover your vaccine costs for the next decade. Let's say.
Even at the moment, those cows are still very, very valuable. Dairy cattle, do we worry about? I mean, yeah, beef cattle.
Beef and dairy cattle, as I said, it's clostridial diseases typically hit the headlines and hit everyone's sort of brain function when we're thinking about sheep farming and lamb farming, particularly with pulpy kidney, for instance, and losing lambs with wounds to the head and things from fighting. But it does occur in cattle. We do get losses in cattle from pulpy kidney and from blood poisoning and black disease, which is a nasty clostridial disease which is set up by following intramuscular injections or bruises and wounds to the musculature. And although it's not typically common, we do see outbreaks from time to time. And when even if it's a sporadic loss of one animal, as I've just said, you can vaccinate for a decade, and it's more than going to cover the cost efficiencies of even not losing one animal. So
exactly. So it's prevention rather than cure.
Absolutely.
Nick, thank you very much indeed. In just a moment, we'll be talking irrigation.